August 1st, 1958, 11:47 p.m., USS Nautilus slipped beneath the surface of the Chukchi Sea and disappeared into darkness. Commander William Anderson watched the depth gauge climb, 100 feet, 200, 300, as his submarine descended toward the Arctic ice pack. Above them, a frozen ceiling stretched across thousands of square miles. No charts, no landmarks, no way to surface if something went catastrophically wrong. Anderson gave the order, "Take her under the ice." Nautilus nosed forward. Sonar painted confused pictures of the ice ceiling, jagged, irregular, extending down in massive pressure ridges that could tear through steel if they miscalculated by even feet. The control room fell silent except for quiet reports of depth, heading, speed. 116 men were now committed to a mission that would either make them legends or add their names to the long list of explorers the Arctic had claimed. This was Operation Sunshine, the first attempt to cross the Arctic Ocean completely submerged, to reach the North Pole from beneath, to prove that the frozen top of the world had become a highway for submarines that didn't need to breathe. They were 12 minutes under the ice pack when crisis hit. The ice detection sonar started giving erratic readings. Numbers flickered. The display showed clearances that contradicted other instruments. Anderson watched the malfunction develop with practiced calm. Without accurate sonar, they were navigating blind. The Arctic ice ceiling wasn't flat. Pressure ridges extended 30, 40, sometimes 50 feet down into the water. If Nautilus struck one at speed, the impact could rupture the hull, flood compartments, kill everyone aboard. Anderson had three options: surface immediately and abort, continue forward at reduced speed, gambling on manual depth control, or retreat, fix the equipment, try again. He chose retreat. Nautilus turned south, crept back toward open water, surfaced under midnight sun. Engineers worked frantically, traced circuits, replaced components, recalibrated sensors. 48 hours of diagnosis revealed interference from other electronic systems. The fix was technical, tedious, not guaranteed to work, but it was the best they had. August 3rd, 1958. Nautilus approached the ice pack for the second time. Everyone knew the sonar had malfunctioned. Everyone knew they were trusting repaired equipment with their lives. Anderson took Nautilus under at 11:15 p.m. The sonar worked. Readings were clean, consistent. They pushed deeper under the pack, moving north at 8 knots. The first hours were tense. Every man watched instruments with absolute focus. Depth, clearance, course, ice thickness varied constantly, sometimes 200 feet of clearance, sometimes 50 feet, close enough that miscalculation meant collision. But the sonar held, the crew settled into rhythm, watch rotations, meals, equipment monitoring, all the routines of submarine operations, except under an environment that had never supported sustained submarine transit. Commander William Anderson was 41, Southern gentleman turned submarine officer, veteran of the Pacific War. 16 years in submarines had taught him the peculiar skills required to command men in steel tubes underwater where mistakes propagated quickly. He was calm, methodical, unflappable. The Navy had chosen him because the mission required someone who wouldn't panic when instruments failed or ice closed in. Nautilus was 4 years old, 320 feet long, nuclear-powered, capable of sustained 25 knots submerged. She was the first true submarine, designed to operate underwater indefinitely. Her reactor meant she didn't need to surface for air, didn't need to conserve battery power. She could stay down for weeks. This capability made the Arctic transit theoretically achievable. Diesel submarines could make perhaps 100 miles underwater before batteries depleted. Nautilus could make thousands. The 1,830 miles under ice they were attempting was simply impossible for diesel boats. The crew numbered 116, officers trained in submarine operations and nuclear engineering, senior enlisted men who understood reactor physics, sonar, torpedoes, navigation. Every man experienced, competent, and had volunteered knowing the risks. They worked in 3-section rotation, 8 hours on, 16 off. Men slept in bunks stacked 3 high, 8 in cramped mess, maintained equipment in spaces designed for efficiency, and always the knowledge that outside, water temperature hovered just above freezing and the ice ceiling prevented emergency surfacing. The submarine moved through absolute darkness. No sunlight penetrated the ice, no bioluminescence at these depths, only interior lighting and instrument panels. Outside, perfect black. Navigation was challenging in ways surface navigation never faced. Magnetic compasses were nearly useless this close to the magnetic North Pole. The needle would spin, point randomly, provide readings that varied by 40 degrees from truth. Nautilus relied on inertial navigation, gyroscopes measuring every turn, every acceleration, calculating position based on tracking movement. Accurate for hours, maybe days, but errors accumulated. After several days underwater, inertial systems could be miles off. And under ice, being miles off course could mean collision with underwater mountains or ice formations nobody had charted. The Arctic Ocean itself was barely mapped. Charts showed vast blank areas marked soundings unreliable or nothing at all. Nautilus was navigating unexplored ocean, using instruments that worked imperfectly, toward a destination that could only be approximated. August 4th. Over 100 miles from open water. Committed. The ice ceiling grew thicker, more chaotic. Pressure ridges extended down 70 feet. Clearance narrowed. Anderson ordered speed reduced to 6 knots. Slower meant safer but longer transit time, more days under ice, more opportunity for equipment failure. The crew adapted. Men off watch read books, wrote letters, played cards, slept. Someone had brought a record player. Music drifted through compartments. Jazz, classical, songs from a world that seemed distant. But underneath routine, tension simmered. The Arctic had killed explorers for centuries. Ships crushed in pack ice. Men frozen during desperate marches. The submarine service had its own disasters. Boats lost with all hands. Combining submarine operations with Arctic environment meant combining two categories of lethality. The reactor crew monitored equipment obsessively. The nuclear reactor was revolutionary technology, barely a decade old. It worked through controlled fission, uranium atoms splitting, releasing heat, boiling water into steam, steam driving turbines. As long as reaction stayed controlled, it provided unlimited power. If control was lost, it could accelerate catastrophically. They were operating in extreme cold, under pressure, where surfacing for repairs was impossible. The reactor had to work perfectly. August 5th. Nautilus crossed into the deep Arctic basin, where ocean floor dropped to 12,000 feet. They were in the geographic center of the Arctic Ocean, equidistant from all surrounding landmasses, as isolated as humans could be while still on Earth. The ice showed no signs of thinning. Sonar painted pictures of solid frozen ceiling extending beyond sensor range. They were in a bubble of life, warmth, light, air, food, moving through an environment fundamentally hostile to human existence. Anderson checked position. Inertial navigation confirmed they matched projected course. Good progress toward the North Pole. At current speed, they'd reach 90 degrees north within 24 hours. The North Pole had obsessed explorers for generations. Robert Peary claimed to have reached it overland in 1909, though disputed. Roald Amundsen flew over it in 1926, but nobody had approached from below because submarines couldn't operate in this environment for extended periods. Reaching the pole from beneath was largely symbolic. Nothing there except a mathematical point where longitude lines converged, but symbols mattered. The mission demonstrated American technological superiority, proved the U.S. Navy could operate where the Soviet Navy couldn't, shifted Cold War perceptions. The Cold War in 1958 was frozen conflict. No direct combat, but constant maneuvering. The Soviets had shocked the world in 1957 by launching Sputnik, demonstrating rocket technology that could deliver nuclear warheads across continents. America needed a response. Nautilus transiting the Arctic would be that response. It proved American submarines could appear anywhere, including oceans the Soviets considered secure. It demonstrated the Arctic was no longer barrier but route, and it suggested capabilities, ballistic missile submarines under polar ice, undetectable and invulnerable, that would terrify Soviet planners. August 6th approached. The North Pole lay ahead. 400 miles traveled under ice. Over 1,000 miles still to go before reaching open water near Greenland. Retreat meant retracing 400 miles. Advance meant trusting conditions ahead wouldn't deteriorate. Equipment would hold. Navigation was accurate enough. Anderson checked with officers. Reactor, normal. Sonar, functioning. Navigation, confident to within 5 miles. Life support, adequate for 2 more weeks. Crew morale, excellent, considering they lived in a steel tube under millions of tons of ice. The control room hummed with quiet efficiency. Men monitored instruments, adjusted trim, maintained course. Outside, the ice ceiling passed overhead like an inverted landscape. Ridges and valleys and plains, all frozen, all deadly if they miscalculated. Nautilus had been submerged for over 4 days. No contact with outside world. No radio communication through ice and water. No confirmation their navigation was accurate. They were committed to instruments, training, and the belief that mathematics and engineering could conquer geography. At 2300 hours on August 5th, the navigator made a calculation and approached Anderson with results. Based on inertial navigation, accounting for accumulated error, and verified against dead reckoning, they were approximately 12 hours from the North Pole, 12 hours from a point no submarine had ever reached, 12 hours from proving this mission was possible. 12 hours from making history, if the ice didn't kill them first. Anderson nodded acknowledgement, ordered course maintained, checked the reactor status one more time, looked at the depth gauge, the sonar display, the faces of men who'd trusted him to bring them through this alive. Then he settled into the command chair to wait for morning, knowing that sometime in the next 12 hours, USS Nautilus would either cross the North Pole submerged or become another Arctic mystery, a submarine that vanished under ice and was never seen again. The mission continued, the ice waited, and somewhere ahead in the darkness, 90 degrees north latitude approached with mathematical certainty. August 6, 1958, 0:15 hours. Nautilus approached the North Pole with instruments showing position, accuracy degrading. The inertial navigation system, gyroscopes measuring every turn and acceleration since they'd submerged, had been running continuously for over 5 days. Small errors were compounding. The navigator estimated they were within 5 miles of 90 degrees north, but 5 miles of uncertainty under the ice meant they couldn't be certain of anything. And the ice ceiling was changing, thickening, pressure ridges extending deeper. Sonar showed clearances dropping from comfortable hundreds of feet to uncomfortable dozens. Clearance 30 feet, the sonar operator called. Large pressure ridge ahead. Extends down to con. That ridge goes down at least 80 feet. Anderson checked depth. They were at 350 feet. The ridge overhead meant ice extending down to nearly 430 feet, deeper than Nautilus's current operating depth. If they'd been running shallower, they would have collided with underwater ice moving at 6 knots. The impact would have crushed the sail, possibly ruptured the hull. Take her down to 500 feet, slow to 4 knots. Nautilus descended, passing under the massive pressure ridge with 20 feet of clearance between keel and ice below, because the Arctic ice didn't just extend down from above. In some places, pressure and current pushed ice formations deep into the water column, creating obstacles above and below. They were navigating a three-dimensional maze in absolute darkness with instruments that couldn't show them everything, and charts that showed them almost nothing. 00:23 hours. The navigator made his calculation, checked it twice, then approached Anderson. Captain, based on dead reckoning and inertial nav, we've crossed 90 degrees north latitude. We're at the pole, sir, give or take 5 miles. Anderson looked at the depth gauge showing 480 feet, looked at the sonar display showing ice above and below, looked at the chronometer marking the moment. He picked up the intercom. This is the captain. For those interested, we've just reached the North Pole submerged, first vessel in history to do so. We'll celebrate when we're back in open water. Right now, we've still got 1,400 miles of ice between us and the Atlantic. Stay focused, stay sharp, that is all. Brief acknowledgments from compartments throughout the boat, then back to work. Because reaching the pole was symbolic, but getting out alive was survival. Anderson marked the ship's log. 00:23, August 6, 1958. North Pole, depth 480 feet. Proceeding toward Fram Strait. Somewhere directly above them, 480 feet of water and perhaps 20 feet of ice separated the submarine from the mathematical point where Robert Peary claimed to have stood after brutal marches in 1909, where Roald Amundsen flew over in 1926, where explorers had died trying to reach for centuries. Nautilus passed through it like it was just another coordinate. No flag to plant, no photograph to take, just silent passage through dark water under ancient ice. But the transit wasn't half over. It was barely beginning the difficult part. 6 hours past the pole, at 0630 hours August 6th, the reactor developed a problem. Not catastrophic. Not yet. But troubling. A coolant pump in the secondary loop was vibrating. Not excessively, but more than normal. The reactor operator reported it to the engineering officer. The engineering officer reported it to Anderson. How long can it run? Anderson asked. Unknown, sir. Could be fine for days. Could seize in an hour. If it seizes, we lose that loop. We can operate on one loop, but at reduced power. We'd need to slow down significantly. Anderson did the mathematics. Current speed 4 knots. Distance to open water approximately 1,400 miles. At 4 knots, roughly 15 days to the Atlantic. If they had to reduce to 2 knots because of power limitations, that became 30 days. Food would last. Air would last. But crew endurance, equipment reliability, accumulated navigation errors, those became serious problems on a 30-day submerged transit. Can you fix it without shutting down the reactor? Not while submerged, sir. We'd need to surface, open the compartment, access the pump. Maybe 6 hours of work. Surfacing meant finding a polynya, a natural opening in the ice, or breaking through. Both options required luck and time they didn't have. Monitor it continuously. Report any change immediately. We keep going. The vibrating pump became another item on the list of things that could kill them. It joined degrading navigation accuracy, thickening ice, psychological fatigue, and the simple fact that they were operating experimental technology in an environment that had never supported sustained submarine operations. August 6th became August 7th. The ice above showed no signs of thinning. They were in the deep Eurasian basin, where the ocean floor dropped to over 12,000 feet. Nautilus maintained depth at 500 feet, a tiny bubble of life suspended in darkness between ice ceiling and abyssal depths. The sonar operators reported ice conditions continuously. The ceiling was chaotic, ridges and valleys like an inverted landscape. Sometimes clearance opened to 200 feet. Sometimes it contracted to 20. Each variation required depth adjustments, constant vigilance, absolute focus. The crew was showing fatigue, not physical exhaustion. Watches were structured to allow rest, but psychological fatigue from days of confinement, recycled air, the knowledge that outside was environment immediately lethal to human life. Men became quieter, tempers shortened, small irritations escalated, a minor argument in the crew's mess over card game rules, a sharp exchange between reactor operators on different watches. Nothing serious, but indicators of stress accumulating. Anderson noticed and made more frequent tours through the boat, showing command presence, reminding everyone why this mattered. At 14:20 hours on August 7th, they crossed the Lomonosov Ridge, an underwater mountain range running across the Arctic basin. The seafloor rose from 12,000 feet to under 3,000 feet. Charts showed its approximate location, but warned that soundings were incomplete. Anderson ordered depth increased to 600 feet and speed reduced to 3 knots. The ridge could have peaks rising higher than charts indicated. Better to pass over slowly and deep than hit an uncharted seamount at speed. Sonar showed the bottom rising, 10,000 feet below, then 8,000, then 5,000. The ridge was massive, a mountain range that would dominate any landscape if it weren't completely submerged and covered with ice. 3,200 feet below keel, still rising. Anderson watched the depth sounder, calculating clearances, ready to go deeper if necessary. Then the bottom began descending. 4,000 feet, 6,000 feet. They'd crossed the ridge successfully. The Amundsen Basin opened below them, deep water again. Resume course, increase speed to 4 knots. But they'd lost time, and the reactor coolant pump was still vibrating, and navigation uncertainty was growing because inertial systems had been running for over 6 days with no way to recalibrate. August 8th, 0300 hours, 7 days submerged. The navigator approached Anderson with an update that confirmed what they'd been fearing. Sir, navigation uncertainty has increased to approximately 15 miles radius. We could be anywhere in a 30-mile diameter circle based on inertial nav alone. 15 miles, under normal circumstances not critical, but they were approaching the continental shelf north of Greenland, where water depth decreased rapidly. If they were 15 miles off course in the wrong direction, they could run into shallow water or grounded ice or underwater terrain that charts didn't accurately show. Can you narrow it down using sonar mapping of the seafloor? Possibly, sir, if we find distinctive bottom features and can match them to charts, but the charts in this region are sparse, Soviet data mostly, reliability unknown. Anderson studied the charts spread on the navigation table. Large sections showed minimal detail, dotted lines indicating approximate depth contours, question marks where soundings didn't exist. They were navigating with maps that were educated guesses in places where guessing wrong meant death. At 0800 hours, the ice conditions deteriorated sharply. Clearance dropped to 20 feet, then 15 feet. The sonar operator's voice took on edge. Con, sonar, we're entering heavy pressure ridge formation. Ice thickness increasing. Multiple ridges extending down to. Con, clearance is 10 feet and decreasing. 10 feet between the top of Nautilus's sail and solid ice. At 3 knots, if they rose even slightly, collision was inevitable. All stop. Maintain depth precisely at 600 feet. Nautilus coasted to a halt, drifting in current. The control room was absolutely silent except for ventilation hum and the quiet pinging of active sonar measuring the ice above. Anderson studied the sonar display. They were in a region of extremely compressed ice. Pressure ridges everywhere, some extending down 90 feet from the surface. The clearance ahead looked impossible. Ice formations that left no passage large enough for a submarine. Sonar, any indication this clears ahead? Negative, sir. We're getting returns showing heavy ice for at least 5 miles forward. Could be more. That's our sonar range limit. They were blocked. 7 days into the mission, 700 miles from open water, stopped by ice so thick and compressed that passing under it was impossible. Options. Turn back and try to find alternate route, adding days to the transit. Navigate around the ice field, risking going off course into unknown water. Or push forward slowly, hoping the ice would thin, knowing that if it didn't, they could become trapped. Chief of the boat, I need your assessment. Can we maintain trim well enough to navigate through ice with 10-foot clearance? The chief of the boat, senior enlisted man responsible for ballast and trim, considered the question carefully. 10 feet meant essentially no margin for error. Any miscalculation, any unexpected current, any trim variation would send Nautilus into the ice. Sir, in calm water with no current, maybe. In reality, under these conditions, I wouldn't guarantee it. Anderson nodded. Honest assessment was better than false confidence. He looked at the navigation plot, looked at the sonar display, looked at the faces of men waiting for decision. Then he made the choice that would determine whether Operation Sunshine succeeded or failed. Come right to 030. We navigate around this ice field to the north. Slow ahead, 3 knots. Sonar, continuous reporting. Navigation, track our deviation from planned course and calculate new position estimates. Nautilus turned north, deviating from the planned route, heading into waters that charts showed with even less detail. They were improvising now, navigating by instinct and hope, and the skill of men who understood that under the ice, there were no perfect choices, only choices that might not kill you immediately. The ice field extended for miles. They crept along its boundary, looking for passage, finding none. 20 miles north of planned course, then 30 miles. The navigator updated position estimates, but uncertainty was growing. They could be anywhere in a 50-mile radius now. At 1640 hours, sonar reported the ice field appeared to be thinning ahead. Clearances increased, 20 feet, 30 feet, 50 feet. They'd found the edge. Come left to 090, resume original course. But they lost a full day navigating around the obstruction. And they still had over 600 miles to open water, and the reactor pump was still vibrating, and they had no idea if their current position estimates were even close to accurate. August 8th, 2100 hours. Anderson was in his cabin reviewing charts when the sonar operator's voice came over the intercom with words that made his stomach contract. Con, sonar, we're picking up what sounds like another submarine. Range approximately 8,000 yards. Bearing 045. Contact is submerged. Another submarine. Under the Arctic ice. The Soviets had been developing their own nuclear submarine program, but American intelligence didn't believe they had boats capable of under-ice operations yet, which meant either intelligence was wrong, or this was something else. Anderson reached the control room in seconds. Sonar, what's the contact doing? Appears stationary, sir. We're hearing machinery noise. Sounds like reactor coolant pumps, but no propeller noise. Could be drifting or sitting on the bottom. Depth under keel? 800 feet, sir. A submarine could sit on the bottom at 800 feet, or it could be drifting, disabled, crew already dead from some malfunction, or it could be Soviet, deliberately quiet, waiting. Come left to 300, silent running, minimal speed for steerage. Nautilus turned away from the contact, moving as quietly as possible. If it was Soviet and they'd detected Nautilus, the political implications were severe. Operation Sunshine was secret. The Navy didn't want the Soviets knowing American submarines could operate under Arctic ice. They crept away. The sonar contact faded. After 30 minutes with no indication of pursuit, Anderson ordered course resumed toward the Atlantic. But the encounter had added another layer of tension. They weren't alone under the ice. Someone else was operating in these waters, and whether that was good or bad depended on who they were and what they knew. August 9th, 0400 hours, 8 days submerged. Food was monotonous. Air was stale. Men were exhausted. The reactor pump vibration had increased slightly but not failed. Navigation uncertainty was approximately 40 miles radius, and according to the navigator's best estimate, they were approximately 400 miles from the ice edge near Greenland. 2 more days at current speed, 2 more days of compressed ice, navigation uncertainty, equipment that could fail, crew endurance wearing thin. Anderson stood in the control room watching depth and course and sonar displays. Outside, ice. Below, abyssal darkness. Ahead, uncertain. The mission had become a test of endurance. Not dramatic, not cinematic. Just grinding persistence through environment hostile to human life, maintained by men who refused to quit because quitting meant dying. August 9th, 1958, 1347 hours. The temperature gauge in the secondary coolant loop spiked 15 degrees in 30 seconds. The reactor operator watched the needle climb with trained calm, then reached for the intercom. Con, maneuvering. Secondary coolant pump number 2 is failing. Temperature rising. Recommend immediate reactor shutdown. Anderson reached the control room as the engineering officer initiated scram procedure, emergency shutdown, control rods slamming into the reactor core, stopping the fission reaction before heat buildup could damage fuel elements. The submarine's lights flickered. The steady hum of electrical systems wavered. Then emergency power kicked in, and red lighting bathed every compartment in crimson glow that made everyone look already dead. All stop! Switch to battery power. Rig for silent running. Nautilus coasted forward on momentum while the reactor, heart of the boat, source of unlimited submerged endurance, went cold and silent. Without reactor power, they had batteries. Batteries gave them maybe 12 hours if they were extremely careful. 12 hours of minimal lighting, life support only, no propulsion except what batteries could provide at drastically reduced speed. They were 380 miles from open water, give or take 50 miles of navigation uncertainty, under ice that prevented surfacing, in an ocean that would kill them in minutes if the hull breached. Anderson went to engineering where the chief engineer waited outside the reactor compartment, still too hot to enter, radiation levels elevated from emergency shutdown. The coolant pump bearing seized, metal fatigue, probably from continuous operation in extreme cold. We can replace it from spares, but we need 4 hours minimum for the compartment to cool enough for safe entry, then 6 to 8 hours for the actual repair work, 10 to 12 hours, their entire battery reserve, and if the repair failed, they'd be drifting under ice with no power and no options. Do the repair, I'll buy you the time. Anderson returned to control. The navigator had updated their drift. Ocean current was pushing them northeast at approximately 1 knot. In 12 hours, they'd drift 12 miles off course into unknown hazards. Con, sonar. We're drifting toward grounded ice ridge. Range 8,000 yards. 8,000 yards, 4 nautical miles. At 1 knot drift, they'd reach it right about when the reactor compartment would be cool enough to enter. The chief of the boat did calculations. Sir, if we use batteries to fight the current, we'll drain them in 6 hours. We won't have enough reserve for life support during repair. Choose. Drift into ice and possibly collide, or use battery power to hold position but run out of air before repair is completed. We drift. Sonar. Continuous tracking. If we get within 2,000 yards, we maneuver clear. Damn the consequences. The crew settled into waiting. Emergency lighting cast red shadows. Temperature began dropping as heating was shut down to conserve power. Men put on extra layers and tried not to think about drifting helpless under Arctic ice with a dead reactor. At 1740 hours, radiation levels dropped to acceptable. The engineering team suited up and entered the compartment still radiating waste heat. They worked by flashlight in cramped spaces around machinery that could kill them if they made mistakes. Anderson monitored progress while sonar reported ice getting closer. 4,000 yards, 3,500 yards, 3,000 yards. At 2100 hours, they drifted to within 2,500 yards. Anderson ordered battery power engaged. Ahead 1/3, maintain position 3,000 yards from that ridge. The batteries drained faster than calculations predicted. Cold water affected efficiency. What should have given 6 hours of maneuvering gave 4. At 23:30 hours, battery status was critical, and the reactor was still offline. Anderson went back to engineering. Chief, I need honest status. The chief engineer was covered in sweat despite the cold, hands black with grease. Sir, we've replaced the pump. Running function test now. If tests pass, we can start reactor restart procedure. Total time to full power, maybe 90 minutes. 90 minutes. Battery power remaining, approximately 40 minutes. If the tests fail, then we're dead in the water, sir. Literally. At 23:45 hours, tests were successful. At 23:50 hours, they began reactor restart. Bringing a nuclear reactor online was methodical and could not be rushed. Control rods withdrawn gradually, monitoring neutron flux, temperature, pressure. Textbook procedure required 45 minutes minimum. They didn't have 45 minutes. Battery power would die in 30. The chief engineer pushed the timeline as much as safety allowed. Control rods came out faster. Temperature rise was steeper. They were gambling that the reactor would behave predictably under non-standard conditions. August 10th, 0018 hours. 31 minutes after beginning restart, the reactor went critical. Self-sustaining fission reaction, heat building, steam generating. The engineering officer brought turbines online and electrical power flowed. Lights came back up. Ventilation resumed. Battery drain stopped with approximately 8 minutes of reserve remaining. Anderson allowed himself 10 seconds of relief. Then, ahead 2/3, come to course 090, resume transit. They'd lost 12 hours, drifted 23 miles off course, used their battery reserve completely, but they were moving again. August 10th, 0915 hours, 10 days submerged. The crew showed serious fatigue. Not physical exhaustion, but psychological erosion from too long confined. Tempers were short. Men made small mistakes. The corpsman reported increasing stress complaints, and the ice was getting worse. They'd entered the region where Arctic Ocean compressed into Fram Strait between Greenland and Svalbard. Ocean currents forced ice together, creating pressure ridges of extraordinary size and density. Con, sonar, clearance decreasing, were showing 15 feet and getting worse. Anderson checked depth. They were at 500 feet in water, 650 feet deep. Not much room for maneuvering. Reduced speed to 2 knots. Clearance dropped to 12 feet, 10 feet, 8 feet between the top of Nautilus's sail and ice that could tear through steel. The control room fell silent except for sonar pings and the diving officer calling trim adjustments. 8 feet of clearance at 2 knots meant instant death if anything went wrong. At 12:40 hours, Con, sonar, grounded ice ahead, extends from surface to bottom, blocks our course. The display showed a pressure ridge so massive it had grounded on the seafloor and extended up to the ice ceiling. A wall of ice and 650-foot water. No way under, no way through. All stop. Anderson studied the sonar. The grounded ridge extended beyond detection range. Water to the south was shallowing, approaching Greenland's continental shelf. Water north was uncertain. They couldn't go forward. Going back meant hundreds of miles, and they'd been submerged 10 days with navigation uncertainty approaching 80 miles radius. The navigators' position estimates were educated guesses based on inertial systems running too long without verification. Anderson made his decision. They would surface through the ice. The procedure was theoretical, never tested operationally. Used Nautilus's sail to punch through ice from below. But nobody knew how thick the ice was. Nobody knew if the sail could handle the structural stress. Navigator, estimate ice thickness above us. The navigator checked sonar returns and made calculations involving significant guesswork. Sir, based on analysis, I estimate 8 to 12 feet, but that's approximate. Could be thicker. 8 to 12 feet of Arctic ice. The sail was reinforced steel, but designed for hydrodynamics, not ice breaking. The stress could buckle the structure, damage the hull, flood the submarine, but staying submerged meant dying slowly. Surfacing was risk. Staying was certainty. Anderson briefed his officers, asked for objections. Got none. Rig ship for collision. All hands brace for impact. Secure all loose equipment. Throughout the submarine, men grabbed handholds, secured gear, prepared for impact they couldn't predict. In reactor spaces, engineers monitored systems that had to keep working, regardless of what happened to the hull. Anderson checked readiness reports from all compartments. Everyone was as prepared as possible for something nobody had done before. He looked at the depth gauge showing 500 feet, looked at sonar showing ice above, looked at faces of men who trusted him. Surface the ship. Emergency blow all main ballast tanks. The chief of the boat opened valves, releasing high-pressure air into ballast tanks. Water was forced out through flood ports. Nautilus became lighter, buoyant, rising. The depth gauge began unwinding. 500 feet, 450 feet, 400 feet. Accelerating upward, thousands of tons of steel becoming a missile aimed at ice ceiling. 350 feet, 300 feet, 250 feet. Sonar showed ice directly above, getting closer with terrifying speed. 200 feet, 150 feet. All hands brace for impact. 100 feet, 50 feet. The sail hit ice at approximately 12 knots vertical velocity. The sound was beyond description, metal screaming against ice compressed over years, a grinding roar that rang through every compartment, a vibration that felt like the submarine was tearing apart. Men were thrown against bulkheads, equipment broke loose, light fixtures shattered, the entire hull shuddered with stress steel was never designed to handle. And Nautilus kept rising because there was no stopping. They were committed, momentum and buoyancy driving them upward, and either they'd break through or get wedged in ice and die trapped. The grinding continued. 5 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds of tortured metal against ancient ice, of structural members bending, of welds stressed beyond design limits. 20 seconds, 25 seconds. Then suddenly the resistance changed. The quality of sound shifted. The sail broke through into air and Nautilus surged upward, punching through ice into Arctic daylight. The submarine surfaced in a pool of broken ice under pale sky. The grinding stopped. The shuddering ceased. Emergency silence fell. Anderson keyed the intercom. Damage control. Report status all compartments. Reports came back. The sail was damaged. Bent steel, torn fittings, but structurally intact. Hull had held. Minor flooding in ballast tanks. Nothing the pumps couldn't handle. No reactor damage. They'd survived. Anderson climbed to the bridge and opened the hatch. Arctic air poured in, cold and clean and carrying the smell of ice and freedom. After 10 days breathing recycled air, it was almost overwhelming. The navigator came up with a sextant and took star sights. First accurate position fix in 10 days. He did calculations, checked them twice, then reported with an expression mixing vindication and horror. Sir, actual position compared to estimated position shows we drifted 73 miles off course. Our estimated position put us in deep water. Our actual position, He paused. Sir, if we'd continued on estimated course for another 6 hours, we would have run into the Greenland coast in water less than 200 feet deep. 73 miles of navigation error, 6 hours from running aground. They'd been navigating blind, getting closer to disaster without knowing it. The corrected position showed they were 165 miles from the ice edge. One more day. Anderson studied the ice field ahead. He could see leads, channels of open water between flows. Maybe they could make miles on the surface before ice forced them under. Prepare to get underway. All ahead 1/3. Course 090. Nautilus moved through broken ice, making 6 knots on the surface under midnight sun. Men came to the bridge in small groups, breathing fresh air, seeing sky, standing in wind that numbed faces but felt like a gift. They made 40 miles before ice conditions forced them under. Anderson cleared the bridge and sealed the hatch. Dive the ship. Make depth 400 feet. Course 090. Nautilus slipped beneath the surface for what they hoped would be the last time. 125 miles to the ice edge. One final push. The ice ceiling began thinning. Clearances increased from 20 feet to 50 to 100. Water deepened as they approached Fram Strait where Arctic Ocean met Atlantic. August 11th, 1758 hours, 11 days after entering the ice. Con, sonar, ice edge bearing 095, range 8,000 yards. Beyond that, open water. Subdued celebration in the control room. Quiet acknowledgments, handshakes, grins on faces that had been grim too long. At 1831 hours on August 11th, 1958, USS Nautilus crossed from under the Arctic ice into the Norwegian Sea. Surfaced the ship. Nautilus rose into late afternoon sun. The hatch opened and Atlantic air flooded in, carrying no smell of ice, just salt water and wind. The radio operator sent coded message, Nautilus 90 north. Response came back, well done. Proceed Portland, England for debrief and repair. They'd crossed the Arctic Ocean submerged, reached the North Pole from beneath, proven that nuclear submarines could operate under polar ice, opening strategic possibilities that would reshape Cold War naval doctrine. Anderson stood on the bridge and looked back at the ice edge receding. The Arctic had tested them absolutely, found every weakness, pushed them to the edge of capability. They'd survived through skill and luck and desperate choices when safe choices didn't exist. Nautilus turned south toward England. The mission was complete. The Arctic Ocean had become a highway, and the Cold War had gained a dimension that existed in darkness beneath frozen seas. Operation Sunshine was over. History had been made, and the men who made it were going home. August 12, 1958, 0600 hours. USS Nautilus approached Portland, England through Atlantic waters that felt impossibly warm after the Arctic. Commander Anderson stood on the bridge watching the English coast materialize through morning haze. Behind them, 11 days under ice. Ahead, whatever came next. The radio crackled. Nautilus, this is Portland Harbor Control. You are cleared to dock. Welcome back to the world. Welcome back to the world. As though they'd been somewhere else entirely, which Anderson supposed they had. Portland dock was crowded with officials, Royal Navy officers, American intelligence personnel, men in civilian suits who were definitely not civilians, and at the end of the dock, a black car with diplomatic plates, Nautilus moored. Lines were secured. A Navy Captain Anderson had never met approached with folder marked Top Secret. Commander Anderson, congratulations on successful completion of Operation Sunshine. Your debrief begins in 1 hour. Your crew will be separated and questioned individually. Operational security protocols remain in effect. No communication with family until clearance is granted. Anderson looked at his crew. Men who'd survived because they'd done everything right and gotten lucky when doing everything right wasn't enough. How long until they can go home? Minimum 48 hours. Possibly longer. The crew was dispersed across the base. Anderson watched them go. Young men who looked older now, who moved with careful deliberation of people who'd learned that mistakes had consequences. The debriefs began in a windowless room. 3 naval officers, 2 intelligence analysts, a stenographer recording every word. Tell us about the reactor scram. Why did you choose to drift rather than use battery power immediately? Tell us about the navigation error. 73 miles off course. How did that happen? Tell us about surfacing through the ice. Walk us through the decision process. Anderson answered for 6 hours. Then they brought food and continued for another 4 hours. At 2200 hours, they finally released him to temporary quarters. He lay down and discovered he couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the grinding sound of sail punching through ice, felt the shuddering impact, wondered if the hull would hold. He got up, walked the base perimeter in darkness, tried to process what they'd accomplished and what it had cost. They'd crossed the Arctic. Proven nuclear submarines could operate under polar ice. shifted Cold War naval balance, but they'd survive by margins measured in minutes of battery power and inches of ice thickness. That wasn't skill, that was luck. August 13th, 1958. Second day of debriefs. Nuclear engineers wanted to understand the reactor scram and emergency restart. Why did the pump fail? Could it have been prevented? Anderson explained the chief engineer's decision to accelerate restart timeline because battery power was depleting. The risk calculation, follow procedure, and run out of power, or push the timeline and hope the reactor behaved predictably. The engineers took notes, already thinking about modifications, backup pumps, better batteries, improved monitoring systems, all things that would have helped. All modifications that came after the crew that needed them had already survived without them. In the afternoon, they brought in the navigator, reconstructed the navigation error. How did they drift 73 miles off course? The navigator explained patiently, inertial navigation accumulates error. Under ice, there's no way to verify position. You trust instruments until you surface and discover how far off you actually were. So you were 6 hours from running aground? Based on our estimated position, yes, sir. The room fell silent. Everyone understood. If they hadn't surfaced when they did, 116 men would have died because their instruments were wrong. August 14th, 1958. They brought in security-cleared journalists who would write official accounts. Anderson told the sanitized version. Highly trained crew. Equipment performed admirably. Mission succeeded through careful planning. He didn't mention the 8 minutes of battery power remaining. Didn't mention the 25 seconds of grinding impact when they punched through ice. Didn't mention being 6 hours from disaster. Those details weren't helpful for public morale. That evening, Anderson was allowed to call home. His wife's voice sounded impossibly distant. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine. We're all fine." "When are you coming home?" "Soon. A few more days." He hung up feeling more disconnected than before. How did you explain 11 days under ice to someone who'd been safe in Connecticut? August 15th, 1958. The Navy showed them newspapers. Headlines: American submarine crosses North Pole. President Eisenhower had announced Operation Sunshine success while they'd been in isolation. The crew read articles about themselves written like they were strangers. Heroic journey. Flawless execution. American ingenuity triumphant. Nobody mentioned the reactor scram, the navigation error, the desperate decision to surface through ice. Those details were classified. A young sailor raised his hand. "Sir, can we tell our families what actually happened now?" The Navy captain shook his head. "Operational details remain classified. You can confirm you participated. You cannot discuss specific incidents or equipment failures. Clear." "Clear, sir." They'd go home as heroes who couldn't explain what they'd actually done. August 18th, 1958. Nautilus departed Portland, sailing west toward home. The crew was subdued. Anderson walked through the boat during evening watch. Men were quieter than before the Arctic. More serious. He stopped in the crew's mess where sailors were playing cards. "How's everyone doing?" "Fine, sir." Then more honestly, "I keep dreaming about the ice. The sound when we punch through. I wake up thinking we're stuck." Others nodded. "Same dreams, same flashbacks." "Did you have dreams after the Pacific War, sir? After combat?" Anderson considered maintaining command distance, but these men deserved honesty. "Yes, for years. What you experience under ice, that stays with you. That's the price of pushing boundaries." August 25th, 1958. Nautilus arrived New London to crowds lining the waterfront. Thousands of people. News cameras. Families who'd spent 3 weeks not knowing. The crew emerged to cheers. Anderson waved and felt aware that the crowd was celebrating something they couldn't understand. They saw heroes. He saw exhausted men who'd survived partly through luck. President Eisenhower's representative presented the Presidential Unit Citation. Anderson received the Legion of Merit. Every man received commendation. Then families rushed forward. Anderson found his wife. She looked at him carefully. "You're different." "I'm tired." "It's more than that." She was right. The Arctic had changed something. He'd made choices that determined whether 116 men lived or died, made them with incomplete information and equipment that barely worked, and somehow he'd chosen correctly, or gotten lucky. That knowledge changed you. September 1958. Ticker tape parade in New York City. Millions watching as the crew rode through Manhattan. Anderson waved and smiled and felt disconnected. The parade was for the sanitized version, where planning and training overcame challenges through competence, where the mission succeeded because everything went right. That version was useful, but it wasn't true. The truth involved equipment failures and navigation errors and desperate decisions when all options were bad. The truth involved luck and margins measured in minutes, but the truth wasn't useful for public consumption. October 1958. The crew dispersed to next assignments. Some stayed in submarines, some transferred elsewhere. Some left the Navy entirely. They scattered, carrying private knowledge of what they'd accomplished and what it cost. Most would never discuss it in detail. Some things were too personal to share. Anderson remained with Nautilus through 1959, training new crews, conducting additional Arctic missions that became progressively routine. But the first transit remained unique. The first time you didn't know if it was possible. The first time you made it up as you went and hoped competence would overcome uncertainty. August 1960, 2 years after Operation Sunshine, Anderson attended reunion of the crew in New London. 60 of the 116 men showed up. They told stories, remembered details, laughed about things that hadn't been funny at the time. Late in the evening, one of the reactor operators approached Anderson. "Sir, when we surfaced through ice, did you know we'd make it? Did you know the sail would hold?" Anderson considered lying, considered maintaining command certainty. But these men deserved truth. "No, I believed it was our best chance. I calculated it was less likely to kill us than alternatives. But I didn't know. We found out when we found out." The operator nodded. "Thank you for being honest. I've been telling myself you must have known. It helps to know you were as scared as the rest of us." "I was terrified, but being scared doesn't mean the decision was wrong." Anderson looked around at men who'd trusted him under ice. They'd made history, changed Cold War strategy, proven nuclear submarines could operate in Arctic. But more than that, they'd learned what they were capable of when tested absolutely. They'd discovered they could endure fear and stress that should have broken them, could survive when survival seemed unlikely. That knowledge was more valuable than medals. It stayed with you, shaped who you became. The reunion ended. Men returned to separate lives, but they'd always share the bond of those 11 days. The knowledge that they'd ventured into an environment that should have killed them and come back alive. For the crew, the achievement was simple. They'd been tested absolutely and found they were strong enough. December 1959. Anderson's last day aboard Nautilus. He walked through the boat alone, remembering. The control room where he'd ordered emergency blow. The reactor compartment where engineers had worked while batteries drained. The bent steel of the sail, still showing deformation from impact. He ran his hand along the bent metal. 25 seconds of grinding impact. 25 seconds when they had been committed to a choice that would either save them or kill them. The steel had held, and 116 men had come home because this metal had been strong enough. He left the boat and didn't look back. That chapter was closed, but it wasn't finished. The Arctic stayed with you. The decision stayed with you. The knowledge that you'd been tested and found strong enough but more fragile than hoped. That stayed forever. Anderson stood on the dock and watched the boat. Tomorrow he'd return to duty, to new commands, to the continuing Cold War. But tonight he allowed himself to remember the grinding sound of ice, the 8 minutes of battery power, the decision made in darkness that either saved them or killed them. They'd survived. The mission was complete. And somewhere under Arctic ice, other crews were making the same transit, learning the same lessons about fear and courage, and margins between success and disaster. The legacy continued, the Arctic endured, and the men who'd made history carried their knowledge quietly, the way submariners always had. For men who'd survived impossible things, sometimes survival itself was the only victory that mattered.